Artificial love, we just make it up, 'cause reality will never be good enough. And even if it was, we just mess it up, 'cause we already lost, addicted to the rush. I never meant to fall. All I wanted was...
So we got another smartphone from POCO today to check out, and they have been releasing quite a number of smartphones recently, and the beauty with POCO's marketing strategy is that they give you pretty decent phone in a budget-friendly price, appealing to the younger buyers out there looking for a starter phone. The POCO M5s today is sent over to me by POCO for review, and although these were sent over to me, no money has exchanged hands, and this review is based on my honest and unbiased opinion. So this time around we have gotten official pricing from POCO, and the phone now comes in 3 different variants. The model with the 4GB RAM and 64GB of storage comes in at 699 Malaysian ringgit, or about $200 US. There is also one with 4GB of RAM and 128GB of storage, comes in at 799 Malaysian ringgit, or around $228 US. And the top of the line model has 6GB of RAM with 128GB of storage, which comes in at 899 Malaysian ringgit, or $248 US. So in our market, we get the base variant as well as the top of the line variant. So if you're interested in buying this smartphone, check out my links in the description below. So like most smartphones today, the M5s is a pretty long phone, and the bezel that we get here is also pretty slim, so you get quite a good screen to bezel ratio and makes the phone look very immersive to use. So let's start from the back of the phone. So there are 3 colors you can choose from when buying the POCO M5s, starting with this blue color, which has a nice pearl finish if you point it in different angles, with some purple accents, and you can also get it in white and as well as black. So at the back here, you're not going to get the typical long strip POCO backsplash like you see on a C40 or the M4 5G. Instead, the camera piece is now smaller at the one corner, which is a pretty decent size bump as well. So here, this is not something very new from Xiaomi line of products. You can see this camera style in some of the Redmi products as well. And at the back here, you're going to get a 4 camera setup, and they are not dummy lenses, which is really nice. When I reviewed the M4 5G, I mentioned that the M4 Pro series has crazy megapixel counts, and this time around, POCO is also giving you a 64 megapixel shooter here. So the main unit right over here is the 64 megapixel main camera with an f1.8 aperture, which actually gives quite a nice bokeh or blurred background naturally, even without the portrait mode. So on the left, which is at the top here, you're going to get a 2 megapixel depth camera with an f2.4 aperture, which is used to measure depth info for portrait mode. And next to that, you're going to get the 108-degree ultra-wide lens at f2.2, pretty good. And at the bottom here, you're going to get a dedicated 2 megapixel macro lens at f2.4. So I would think the 64 megapixel lens is something to shout about, but there's no marketing here to say that, and there's only an ultra premium text at the back here underneath the LED flash. Also, you're going to get a standard issue POCO branding here, which some still feels a little bit too big, but I think this is a pretty good size. So on the right of the phone here, you're going to get your volume rocker and also a power button, which is also a fingerprint reader. And I'm glad that POCO went with this instead of the rear mounted one, and I didn't really like that on the C40. So on the other side, you're going to get a SIM tray and micro SD card tray as well. So at the top of the phone, you're going to get an IR blaster and also a speaker grill. And with the M5s, you're getting 2 speakers, one on the top and one on the bottom for stereo playback. So at the bottom here, you're going to get your Type-C charging port to top up the phone, a 3.5mm jack for you to use your favorite earphones with them, and also the bottom speaker grill that we talked about. And on the front now, you're not going to get a dot drop this time, but a dot front-facing camera, which is like a cutout on the screen. And at the front, you're also going to get a 13 megapixel f2.4 aperture selfie camera. So the display that we have here is also really nice and has more of the pro specs you see with the POCO M4 Pro series. And you're going to get a 6.43-inch Full HD Plus AMOLED display, this time with a resolution of 2400 by 1080 with a pixel density of 409 ppi. Pretty good and sharp from most day-to-day use, and using it from a normal viewing distance, you really don't see the screen being pixelated. So with this phone, you're also going to get some pretty nice stuff here, like a full DCI P3 color gamut. So the colors on this phone looks really nice, and POCO also uses Corning Gorilla Glass on this display to give you the rigidity that you need. And with this phone, you're going to get a peak brightness of about 1100 nits, which is honestly quite bright for most situations, but under direct sunlight, I still struggle to see the screen sometimes. So the battery life of the M5s is actually very impressive, and based on my standard test that I run, the 5000 mAh battery along with the AMOLED display really see quite a significant bump in battery performance. So similarly, I have performed my full day YouTube test with max brightness and 4K resolution playback and left it to play the whole day. So I started the test at about 9:45 in the morning, and it dropped to 50% mark at the 8-hour mark, and it continued to power through to the 12 hours mark of continuous YouTube playing at maximum brightness and 4K resolution, and ended the day at 26% battery life at 9:45 p.m. So that's a 12 hours run, and it went down from 100% to 26%, which is pretty good. Then I continued the next day, and it finally went down to 2% battery life at the 15-hour mark. So I think that that's really quite a good testament of how power efficient an AMOLED display is, but of course there are a lot of other factors such as the chipset as well. So the M5s is also good because it supports up to 33 watts fast charging, and the best part is POCO includes the 33 watt fast charger brick in the box itself. So the M5s comes with the MediaTek Helio G95 octa-core processor, which we also see in some Redmi phones such as the Note 11 SE and the Note 10s, and also in some other budget phones, and the performance here is honestly not too bad. It clocks in at 2.05 GHz, which is really not too bad for a budget phone, and comes with an ARM Mali G76 MC4 GPU. So in this time with this chipset, finally we got support for full 4K playback on YouTube, and it also even plays back smoothly with no delays and lags. You can see that I'm playing one of my videos here, which is really smooth, no lags, and navigation around the phone is also really smooth, but of course you're not going to get any 90Hz or 120Hz display, so you can still see the sluggishness there a little bit, but in terms of operation it's actually really smooth with no problems. So gaming with PUBG is also pretty good, and now you can see that I'm running on HDR graphics in the ultra setting, and you can see that it's very smooth, very responsive with no issues, very nice to play overall. So I think this processor is actually a really good processor for gaming. So in terms of storage in Malaysia, you can get either the 64 gig storage model with the 4 gigs of RAM, or the 128 gigs model with 6 gigabytes of RAM, which is not too bad, but with that small price difference, I'm just gonna go with the 6 gigabyte RAM model and boost the storage with a 1 terabyte micro SD card. So the M5s is also rated at IP53 dust and water resistant rating, which is not too bad for a budget phone, and you get decent splash protection, but note that IP53 is not waterproof, so best not to get it soaking wet. So the phone this time comes with a basic Bluetooth 5.0 chipset, which perhaps is what comes with this chipset, so you're not getting anything fancy here, but then again, if you think about it, even the iPhone 13 still comes with Bluetooth 5.0, and only the iPhone 14 gets a bumped up to Bluetooth 5.3. Finally, the POCO M5s also comes supported with MIUI 13, and this time it comes shipped with Android 12, so you don't have to wait for it to drop, and you're already getting the latest Android software on its platform. So most companies love talking about their cameras, and as MKBHD pointed out, Apple spoke about the iPhone 14's camera for 33% of their iPhone keynote. So how does the camera of the M5s perform? Although the phone comes with a 64 megapixel camera, you don't get that when you open the camera app itself. Instead, if you use the photo mode to snap photos, you're just getting a 16 megapixel photo out of the main camera, which is still using the 64 megapixel camera. So you go into the settings and you can configure it to have a 64 megapixel mode, and once you're in there, you're gonna get a massive 6944 by 9248 resolution image, which is the full 64 megapixel. So you're gonna get a marginally sharper image, and thanks to that resolution, you can crop in a lot more compared to the 16 megapixel shot. And thanks to that 1.8 aperture, your backgrounds are naturally blurry if you apply the right techniques. So with portrait mode, you're also going to get a significantly blurry background thanks to the dedicated depth camera to calculate depth information in the image. Of course, you're not shooting with that camera itself, but it just feeds the depth information to the main camera, and you're shooting portrait mode with that, which means you're still going to get pretty nice resolution and photographs. So moving on to the 8 megapixel ultra wide mode. So this time, if you click on the 0.6x, you're going to see a significantly bump in the wide angleness. So this is 118 degrees of wide angle, and it uses the wide angle lens itself, which gives you a very nice perspective, but you do miss out the details of the shot. So if you shoot with this and you zoom in, you're gonna see it's not really that sharp. And finally, the macro lens here is pretty good, but you don't get to select it or configure it to be out here. All you're gonna do is click on settings and you will see macro. So if you click on macro, then it will switch over to use the macro lens, and you can see everything is quite blurry because the focus is actually very near to the lens. So if I pull my subject closer, you can see that it focuses really well. So that's the macro lens, but again, this is a 2 megapixel macro lens, so it's not really that sharp as well. So the front camera is also surprisingly nice at 30 megapixel, and with ample lighting, you're gonna get pretty decent photographs with it as well. So again, night mode here still sees quite a lot of noise and artifacts, which is not that flattering, but if you know what you're doing and you know how to use the pro mode, you can pop this onto a tripod and this takes pretty decent long exposure shot at very low ISOs. So finally, with this POCO smartphone, you're gonna get 4K 30 frames per second using the main camera behind, and with the front camera, you're still gonna get only a 1080p at 30 frames per second. And another interesting thing about this phone, just want to point out that slow motion mode at 720p, you're gonna be able to choose from 120 frames per second to 240 frames per second and up to 960 frames per second. Of course, you're not gonna get like insane high resolution shots with this slow motion, but at 720p and 960 frames per second, it does crop in quite a bit, but you do get the extreme slow motion shot. So the sound quality on the POCO M5s is also really nice sounding, and because of that dual speaker that you get, gives you a nice stereo setup. So the speaker also gets pretty loud for most use cases, and the good thing about this speaker is that they don't sound cheap. Everything about it sounds crisp, sounds clear, and I'm sure it'll be more than adequate for most of your use cases, especially compared to a lot of Bluetooth speakers out there. So this may be slightly more expensive than some of the POCO phones that we've checked out previously, but to be honest, it's still a budget phone. But with its capabilities and performance and a pretty decent set of cameras, I think this is definitely worth checking out. And if you're in the market for a budget smartphone, this is the best POCO phone I've tested so far, although not that many. So that is it for this review. If you find this video helpful, smash the thumbs up button, share this video everywhere, and if you haven't yet subscribed, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.